My life always felt as balanced as a finely tuned instrument. I lived in a quiet suburb of a small European town, where every day unfolded predictably, measured by familiar routines. My husband, William, was caring and attentive, and together we'd built a cozy home I cherished deeply. I truly believed that nothing could disturb our peaceful life. Our life together was calm and carefree. Each day blended into the next, and in that predictability, I always found comfort. But occasionally, late at night when the house was silent, a strange sense of emptiness would creep over me. I'd look at William sleeping beside me and feel, not tired of him, but a vague sadness for something that seemed to have faded. Our conversations lacked depth, our feelings had softened, and our kisses had become routine. I couldn't recall the last time I'd felt a thrill, a simple longing to just be near someone. I convinced myself that this was just the natural rhythm of marriage, a stage every couple goes through. But inside me lingered a quiet, almost imperceptible yearning for something new and fresh, and I couldn't deny that this steady comfort was starting to feel like a closed cage. But one day everything shifted. William's nephew, 𝐤𝐸, came to stay with us for a few weeks, working on a photography project nearby. The moment he walked through the door, I felt an unfamiliar thrill deep within me. 𝐤𝐸 was different now. He seemed more confident, mature, with a new intensity in his gaze. He carried an air of mystery, a magnetism that left me feeling unsettled in a way I hadn't in years. His eyes lingered on me, curious and questioning, as if he were trying to read my thoughts. That subtle but unwavering attention from him stirred something inside me that I couldn't quite ignore. With each passing day, I caught him watching me, his gaze lingering just a moment too long. Despite my best efforts to brush it off, the way he smiled, his calm confidence, began to awaken feelings I hadn't visited in a long time. 𝐤𝐸 became like a shadow, always close, nudging his way into my mind and disrupting the familiar rhythm of my life. Although I tried to keep my distance, I felt the invisible thread between us tightening. For the first time, I sensed a crack forming in my perfect life. A week into his stay, I was feeling his presence more intensely. 𝐤𝐸 was everywhere. In the kitchen with a cup of coffee, in the garden with his camera, observing the world with an artist's eye. One day, he invited me to join him on a walk around town to take photos. I agreed, thinking a change of scenery might clear my head. We wandered through the old streets, passing by shop windows and savoring the crisp autumn air. His enthusiasm for photography was contagious, and soon I was seeing our town through his eyes. The details, the overlooked beauty in everyday things. Every small gesture, how I laughed, how I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. He noticed, commenting with simple, sincere compliments that felt fresh and genuine. 𝐤𝐸's attention gave me a feeling I hadn't realized I missed. Our conversations grew deeper, more personal, as he shared his artistic vision and asked for my opinion on his photos. He was passionate, intense, and open in a way I hadn't remembered. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, flipping through his latest shots. 𝐤𝐸 was explaining how he tried to capture moods, translating moments into visual stories. His excitement was captivating, and I admired how he could find beauty in the ordinary. As he leaned in to show me a close-up shot, his hand lightly rested on my shoulder, staying there just a moment longer than necessary. A jolt of energy coursed through me. I forced myself to focus on the photo, but all I could think about was the warmth of his touch. I looked up, meeting his gaze, and in that shared silence, something shifted. I quickly excused myself, retreating to my bedroom, my heart racing, my mind spinning. I couldn't understand what was happening, how such a brief moment could make me feel so alive. But after that evening, thoughts of 𝐤𝐸 lingered. The rational arguments I gave myself didn't seem to quell the rising desire within me. Every glance, every shared smile seemed to draw us closer, and my heart alternated between stopping and racing each time I saw him. The next day, Spike suggested we walk through the forest nearby. He wanted to capture nature shots, he said, and I agreed, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. The forest was peaceful, bathed in soft autumn light that filtered through the leaves, casting beautiful shadows. I watched him work, his eyes gleaming with passion as he moved confidently through the trees. As we walked deeper, our conversation turned more personal. Spike spoke openly about his feelings, about how photography helped him see the world differently, and how, sometimes in life, it's necessary to follow one's heart, even if it feels risky. His words touched something inside me, stirring emotions I'd long buried. I understood his message, sensing he was hinting at the tension between us. Inside, I battled with myself, reason against desire. I knew I shouldn't allow myself to feel this way, yet something about his honesty and conviction felt undeniably real. As the light began to fade, Spike stopped abruptly and turned to me, reaching out to gently take my hand. I felt the warmth of his touch, my heart racing as I stared at our intertwined fingers. We stood there in silence, and I realized I was teetering on the edge of something that could change everything. Yet I wasn't sure if I was ready to take that step. Fear mingled with a powerful, undeniable attraction. The next day, Spike suggested a trip to a small lake nearby. His voice was casual, like it was the most ordinary idea, but inside me, an undeniable tension bubbled up once more. I hesitated, trying to think of a reason to say no to Spike's invitation, but nothing convincing came to mind. In the end, I agreed, hoping that a walk in nature might quiet the chaos in my mind. The drive to the lake was beautiful, with green hills and fields stretching out in layers, dense groves along the road, and sunlight glinting on the water far off. Spike drove calmly, occasionally glancing at me in a way that made my heart race. I tried to focus on the view outside, but the tension between us was impossible to ignore. When we arrived, the day was perfect, warm and sunny, with a slight breeze rippling across the lake's clear water. We settled in a small clearing with a view of the lake, and Spike pulled out a thermos of coffee and some sandwiches. We began to talk, covering everything from nature to his photography project, and I felt myself relaxing despite my tangled emotions. Spike was charming, and his enthusiasm made it easy to laugh and forget myself for a while. It felt as though time had paused and there was nothing in the world but the two of us. As the sun began to dip lower, casting golden light over the lake, Spike leaned in, his expression turning serious. He reached out, brushing his hand softly against my cheek, and at that moment all thoughts disappeared. I was completely in the moment. He moved closer, his lips finding mine in a gentle kiss. I tensed, my first instinct to pull away, but my hand stopped on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath my palms, strong and steady. Instead of resisting, I gave in, feeling his warmth flow through me. The kiss lasted longer than I expected, and when it ended, I abruptly pulled back, my mind spinning and my heart pounding as though it would leap out of my chest. Without a word, I stood up and headed straight for the car, not daring to look back. Spike called my name, but I ignored him. I needed to get away, to escape before my emotions completely overwhelmed me. When I got home, William was waiting at the door, looking relieved but slightly worried. "Where have you been?" he asked, smiling, but there was a faint hint of something else in his eyes. "We went to the lake," I replied, trying to sound calm. "Just for some fresh air." He nodded, pulling me close and pressing a kiss to my forehead. "I was just about to call you. Dinner's almost ready." The warmth and familiarity of his gesture pierced me with guilt. I felt like a traitor, as though I'd already betrayed him, even though nothing had truly happened. Or had it? Inside, my emotions were a tangled mess. I followed him to the kitchen, anxiety and shame churning through me. A few days later, William told me he'd need to leave for a week on a business trip. I felt my heart skip a beat, realizing I would be alone with Spike. At first I thought of it as a test, but soon I recognized it as a temptation. William hugged me before leaving, his eyes soft and trusting. "I won't be gone long," he said gently, his voice warm. "Try not to miss me too much." I nodded, giving him a polite smile, though my heart was racing with anxiety. We exchanged a kiss, familiar and comforting, and for a moment I felt grounded again. But as soon as the door closed behind him, a strange mix of relief and dread settled over me. In the days that followed, Spike and I did our best to keep our distance. I buried myself in chores, determined to avoid him, and he seemed to respect my space. Our exchanges were brief, filled with polite phrases, but every glance carried an undeniable tension, a heat I couldn't ignore. Nights were the hardest. I tried to avoid any opportunity for us to be alone, but one evening while I was cooking, Spike came into the kitchen. He moved closer, his face serious, his eyes focused intently on me. "Anna," he said softly, his voice low and full of certainty, "I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend I don't feel anything." I froze, my thoughts spinning. I wanted to say something, but words escaped me. He took a step closer, continuing, "You feel it too. I see it in your eyes. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I can't stay silent." Before I could react, he closed the distance, his kiss insistent and filled with all the passion we'd both been holding back. My thoughts dissolved into emotion, his arms wrapping around me as I melted into his touch. It was like a dam breaking, every feeling I'd tried to suppress flooding to the surface. Nothing else mattered. Only this moment. When the kiss ended, we both stood there, breathing heavily, as if we'd crossed an invisible line. But instead of feeling relief, panic began to creep in. What had I done? I took a step back, my legs unsteady, my heart racing. Spike waited, watching me, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. Without a word, I turned and hurried to my room, closing the door behind me, my mind swirling in confusion and disbelief. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind was restless, jumping from one thought to the next, while my heart pounded as if it might burst. I knew I'd crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone. But what was I supposed to do now? The answer felt completely out of reach. The next day, Spike acted calm, as if nothing had happened. He suggested we cook dinner together, and I agreed, hoping that a simple activity might bring us back to some sense of normalcy. We worked side by side, exchanging small talk and laughter, as if this were just another ordinary day. But with each passing moment, I felt a pull, something invisible but powerful growing between us. Our conversation drifted from movies to books, then on to deeper subjects. Our dreams, our fears, the pivotal moments that had shaped us. Spike shared more of himself, and his words took on a warmth and intimacy that felt impossible to ignore. As we moved around the kitchen, he touched me lightly, passing me a dish, brushing his hand against mine, standing just a bit closer than necessary. Each touch sent sparks through me, stirring emotions I'd long forgotten. The more we talked, the more I realized how alive he made me feel. By the time we moved to the living room that evening, I stopped trying to fight it. We sat close on the couch, and he spoke about his life, his feelings, and his desires, while I listened, feeling my defenses crumble one by one. At some point, his arms slipped around my shoulders, and I didn't resist. Instead, I turned to him, and his lips met mine once more, this time with greater intensity and confidence. I returned his kiss, and soon we were in his room, caught up in a whirlwind of passion and need. The night unfolded in a way I'd never forget, filled with a desire that left no room for anything else. The next morning everything felt different. I lay beside him, realizing how much my world had changed in a single night. My feelings for Spike weren't just fleeting, they were deep, undeniable. As I quietly got dressed, I tried to act as if things were normal, but every glance, every word felt like a lie. Emotions battled inside me. Guilt, fear, and an odd joy at having felt something so real, even if it was wrong. All day, every detail seemed to remind me of Spike. His hands, his voice, and the memory of what had happened between us. I knew I couldn't go back to my old life. On the 5th day of William's business trip, an unsettling quiet settled over the house, making me feel on edge. Spike and I spent most of our time together, laughing, talking, cooking meals, our glances charged with unspoken words. It was as if we were the only two people in the world. But that evening something felt different. I was nervous, as if something was approaching that I couldn't predict. Spike suggested we open a bottle of wine, and we settled onto the couch, laughing over some scene in a movie playing on the TV. Then, suddenly, I heard the sound of the door opening. My heart stopped, then pounded wildly as I turned to see William standing in the doorway. His face was frozen in shock, his eyes dark with something much deeper, hurt, anger, disbelief. "What is going on here?" His voice trembled, barely concealing the betrayal that seemed to fill the room. I stood up quickly, my hands shaking. I tried to form words, to find an explanation, but they tangled in my throat. Spike stood up too, his expression turning tense. "William, I can explain," I stammered, my voice unsteady. But William cut me off. "Oh, I don't need explanations. I see everything clearly now." His voice was cold, his words like a slap. He turned to Spike, who took a step forward, but William raised a hand. "I don't want to hear anything from you either, Spike. Both of you, just leave." Silence settled heavily over the room. My eyes filled with tears, and I felt the weight of all I'd done crushing me. I wanted to apologize, to turn back time, to somehow fix what I'd shattered, but I knew it was too late. Spike stood beside me, his expression set, but his eyes met mine with regret. He nodded slightly, and we both moved toward the door, our steps heavy. William's shoulders were slumped, his back turned, and it was clear he couldn't bear to look at us. As we stepped outside, the cold wind hit me like a shock, cutting through the warmth that had felt so consuming only moments before. I realized we'd lost everything. My entire life with William, shattered in an instant. The porch felt like the edge of a cliff, and I stood there, rooted, the realization washing over me that I had destroyed it all. How had I let things get to this point? How had I given in so easily? Allowed one moment to upend everything I thought I valued? Questions circled in my mind, but there were no answers. Spike stood beside me in silence, his presence both a comfort and a weight. Finally he spoke, his voice low and strained. "Nina, I think we need to stop. Everything that happened was a mistake." I turned to him, stunned. His words felt like another blow. He looked at me with pain in his eyes. The fire that had drawn me to him now dimmed. "A mistake," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You really think it was a mistake?" Spike closed his eyes and nodded. "Yes. I can't keep doing this with you, Anna. We've destroyed too much. I've destroyed too much." I felt a pang deep inside as his words cut through me. Our relationship had been a fantasy, a fragile escape from reality. We'd been infatuated, blind to the damage we were causing. "So what now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I was unraveling. Spike looked away, staring into the distance. Now we move on. I don't know how, but I know we can't be together. Those words were the final crack, shattering what little I had left. I was left alone, feeling lost, emptied of everything I'd known. The life I'd had with William was gone, and the future I'd imagined was gone with it. I knew then that I would have to start over, from nothing. Spike quietly turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the porch, watching as he disappeared into the dark. In my heart, I felt a cold emptiness take root, the weight of my mistakes settling over me like a heavy shroud. I wandered aimlessly through the streets, my feet moving of their own accord. The city around me was indifferent, its silence echoing the emptiness I felt inside. I stopped in front of a shop window, but I barely noticed the display, my thoughts too far away. I was left with nothing but the cold truth of what I'd done and the uncertain path that lay ahead. My mind kept circling back to what had happened, like a relentless storm of regret and questions. How had I ended up here? How could I have destroyed my life so easily? I had lost everything. My home, my husband, and even the connection with Spike that had felt like a promise of something new and bright. Now, I didn't know where to go or how to fill the vast emptiness inside me. Each step felt weighed down by an invisible burden I couldn't shake. Eventually, I sank onto a bench in the park, covering my face with my hands as tears streamed down my cheeks. Inside, a storm of emotions raged. Pain, anger, regret, and fear. I felt utterly lost and helpless. William's face flashed in my mind, the look of shock and disappointment he'd had when he found Spike and me together. I'd shattered his trust, destroyed our marriage, and torn apart the life we'd built. I had hurt someone who deserved better, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd lost everything meaningful in my life, and it was my own doing. Time passed, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I felt hollow, like I'd lost even the hope of a future. My world had crumbled, and I would have to start over, but I had no idea where to begin. At some point, though, I realized I needed to find the strength to keep going, despite the regret, the pain, the loneliness. No one could help me if I didn't take the first step myself. I took a deep breath, wiped away my tears, and stood up. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew my life wasn't over, and that small realization was enough to give me a spark of hope. With nowhere else to turn, I decided to go to my parents' house. The trip back to my childhood town felt heavy, and knocking on their door was like opening a door to an unfamiliar version of myself. My mother answered with a look of concern, but she didn't ask questions. She simply hugged me and led me inside. I felt broken, and even my parents' once cozy home felt strange and empty. I didn't know how to explain what had happened, and thankfully, they didn't press for answers. They understood that I needed time. But I couldn't sit idly, waiting for my life to mend itself. The next day, I went into town and found a job at a small local cafe. It wasn't what I had envisioned for myself, but the work kept me busy. I learned to smile at customers, serve orders, and act as if everything was fine, even though turmoil churned inside me. As the days passed, I realized that I had spent far too long seeking validation in others, relying on their approval to feel whole. Now, I understood that true confidence could only come from within. One afternoon, I walked past the local cultural center and noticed a sign for painting classes. I'd always enjoyed drawing, so on a whim I signed up. At my first class, I sat in front of a blank canvas, unsure where to start. But when I finally put brush to paper, I felt something unlock inside me. With each stroke, I poured out my pain, fear, regret, and even anger, expressing what I couldn't put into words. It was freeing. I began to find a sense of balance, a quiet strength. Despite all the mistakes I had made, I felt I still had a chance to start over and build a life where I could be true to myself. These classes became my lifeline. Art became a way to let go, and through it, I found moments of peace. Slowly, I began to believe that my life hadn't ended. Instead, it had only begun a new chapter. Living with my parents felt like a temporary refuge, but over time I realized I needed to keep moving forward. I continued working at the cafe, finding comfort in the routine. Serving customers, chatting briefly over a cup of coffee, exchanging smiles. All of it reminded me that life could be simple and joyful in small ways. At the painting classes, I met others who were at their own crossroads, struggling with their own challenges. We shared stories, dreams, and laughter, and each new friend strengthened my confidence. Their kindness helped me see my own life from a different, more hopeful perspective. One friend I made was Bella, a young woman who had also gone through a painful divorce. She was brave, independent, and managed to find joy despite her hardships. Her optimism was contagious, and we started meeting up after classes, exploring the city, visiting museums, and sharing our hopes for the future. Bella became not only a friend but a reminder that it was possible to survive the darkest times and emerge stronger. I also grew close to Bernie, a music teacher who introduced me to the world of melodies and rhythm. He taught me to play the guitar, giving me a new way to express emotions that couldn't fit onto a canvas. His understanding and patience helped me rebuild my confidence, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free to be myself without fear of judgment. With each passing day, I became more independent, more grounded. My life is filled with new hobbies, new friends, and a growing sense of purpose. I didn't need anyone's approval to feel complete. I was building something new, step by step, rediscovering who I was. My life was far from the one I'd once known, but each day felt like a step toward a better version of myself. I no longer felt lost. I knew I had a future, and I was the one who would shape it. Months passed, and I continued my journey of learning, working, and healing. My days were steady, filled with quiet contentment, but one morning a message appeared on my phone. It was from Spike. He was back in town and wanted to meet to talk. My heart raced, my mind immediately flooding with memories, questions, and a swirl of emotions. I didn't know if I should meet Spike. He was part of a past I was working hard to leave behind, yet I sensed this conversation was unavoidable. After giving it a lot of thought, I agreed, and we decided to meet at the park. The park was quiet, a blanket of fallen autumn leaves carpeting the ground. I stood there, watching the leaves drift down, feeling anxiety well up in my chest. When Spike approached, he looked tired. His eyes shadowed with emotions I couldn't fully read. "Anna," he began, his voice steady but serious. "I know I caused a lot of pain. I know our relationship destroyed everything you had." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. Spike looked into my eyes, and there was a raw sincerity there. "I'm sorry," he said. "I needed time to understand what happened. My feelings for you were real. I truly wanted us to work. But now I see how much damage we caused. It was a mistake." Hearing his words hurt, but at the same time I felt a strange sense of relief. I knew he was speaking the truth. "I forgive you, Spike," I said quietly, my voice calm but firm. "I know you didn't intend for any of this to happen, but I need to move forward. I can't build a life with someone who brought so much chaos into it." He nodded, lowering his gaze. Regret flickered in his eyes, mingled with a quiet acceptance. "I understand, Anna," he replied softly. "I hoped we might start fresh, but I see now that's not possible." We stood in silence as leaves swirled around us. I felt a weight lift as I finally let go of the past. Forgiveness didn't mean returning to what was. It was freeing myself to move on. Spike said goodbye and walked away, leaving me alone in the quiet park. But this time I felt calm, knowing I'd taken a step toward my own freedom. After meeting with Spike, I felt a new sense of liberation. The memories of our time together remained, but they no longer controlled me. Instead, I turned my focus to the things that brought me joy, the things that helped me rediscover myself. I spent more and more time painting, pouring my emotions into each piece. Art became a refuge, a language through which I could communicate with both myself and the world. My teacher noticed the change, commenting that my work had grown deeper, more expressive, like it was coming from my soul. That validation reassured me that I was on the right path. I began exploring other activities that brought me joy, like yoga and dance. Through these classes, I found new friends and a renewed confidence in my body and mind. I felt stronger, more resilient, and my life filled with energy and purpose. Working at the cafe transformed from just a job into a place of inspiration, where I observed the world and connected with people. I started to realize that everyone has their own unique story, and this gave me a fresh perspective. I no longer felt alone. I was part of something larger. Bella and Bernie became pillars of support and inspiration. Bella's resilience after her divorce showed me how to keep going even when life was hard, while Bernie, through our music sessions, taught me to express emotions I hadn't even realized I was holding inside. Our conversations, laughter, and dreams helped me see that I could overcome anything as long as I faced it openly and honestly. The mistakes of my past had made me stronger, wiser, and more willing to embrace whatever came next. Each day became a step toward personal growth, a rebirth of sorts. I started to think about the future, about the opportunities waiting for me. I didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but I no longer feared the unknown. My life was mine to rebuild, and the possibilities felt limitless. One morning I woke early, just as the first rays of sunlight began filtering through my curtains. This day felt different, even though nothing had outwardly changed. I felt ready, more alive than I had in a long time, like I was on the cusp of something beautiful. As I stood by the window, watching the city wake up, I realized how much my view on love, trust, and myself had changed. I no longer felt the need to rely on someone else's approval to feel complete. I understand now that true love is grounded in honesty, respect, and, most importantly, self-respect. I wouldn't lose myself again for the sake of a fleeting thrill. Whatever lay ahead, I knew I was enough on my own, and any future relationship would have to complement the strength I had found within myself. I got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the waking city. The sky was turning from dark to blue, a new day unfolding, and with it, a new life for me. I felt a confidence I'd never had before. My past no longer had a hold on me. I'd learned to let go of regrets and to see not an end, but a beginning. After a quick shower, I got dressed and went to the kitchen to make breakfast, savoring the small, simple routine as part of this new chapter. I began thinking about my next steps. Maybe I'd open my own gallery, or find a new hobby that would captivate me. The options felt endless, and for the first time I knew they were all within my reach. Bella and Bernie had invited me to spend the weekend out of town at a small lakeside village. I looked forward to the trip, knowing it would be another step in my journey of self-discovery. As I prepared to leave, I paused in front of the hallway mirror. In my reflection, I saw not the lost, broken person I once was, but someone who had found the courage to rebuild her life. I smiled, knowing that many wonderful moments awaited me. With a steadying breath, I grabbed my bag and stepped outside. The cool morning breeze caressed my face, and I took in the fresh air, feeling grounded and certain. This day was mine, filled with possibility. I was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, with confidence and an open heart. I had finally moved on, and as I took my first steps forward, A quiet smile spread across my face. My new life had begun, and I was ready to live it fully.